Rishi Sunak is determined to send asylum seekers on a one-way ticket to Rwanda. His immigration minister says no chance and has quit. So what hope now to stop the boats and for the PM himself? Tonight we're in the Hampshire town of Petersfield. This Conservative stronghold is next door to Hambledon, known as the cradle of cricket. It claims it invented the game. But our programme, of course, goes out all across the UK, and our audience here, as every week, reflects the broad electoral picture across the nation. Welcome to Question Time. Johnny Mercer, who sits in Cabinet as Minister for Veterans Affairs. That follows a military career of his own, where he had 3 tours of Afghanistan, retiring as a captain in 2013. Anneliese Dodds chairs the Labour Party and is Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities. Having previously been a member of the European Parliament, she's been in the House of Commons as MP for Oxford East for 6 years. She was Shadow Chancellor for just over a year in 2020. The journalist and author Peter Hitchens has recently been released from jail. That is, the simulated prison in the TV reality show Banged Up, along with, as it happens, his fellow panellist Johnny Mercer. He writes for The Mail on Sunday and has written several books about politics and recent history. And George Monbiot is a writer and activist, especially on climate change. He's travelled the world as a journalist and campaigner and has written over 20 books, most recently on environmental issues. Good evening. Welcome to our panellists. Welcome to our audience here in Petersfield. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home as well. You can follow the programme on social media, or you can watch or listen to the programme anytime you like on BBC Sounds or on the iPlayer. So, let's kick off with our first question, which, of course, the panel, as always, do not know. I'm sure they'd like to. Tilly Cromwell.
Will the Rwanda bill cost the Conservatives the next general election?
Well, it's cost them an immigration minister. Johnny?
Yeah. Look, I think when we're looking at this issue, we need to look at it in the round, which is what we're trying to do. I think, you know, you look at the issue of migration, and certainly illegal migration, and I go out and speak to people in Plymouth and across the country all the time, and it's the unfairness that they feel of people illegally entering the country. And you know, it speaks to our values and what we believe in and what the country is about, that actually we put a stop to that. We put a stop to the trade that sees so many people end up dead in the English Channel. And we need to control migration into this country. Now, when you're trying to do that, clearly it's not an easy task. And there are lots of different levers you need to pull, one of which is a deterrent of Rwanda. Now, clearly that has hit difficulties as it's going through. The Prime Minister was very clear today, you know, he's sticking with this and we are going to see it through, and he is determined to make it work. And I think, you know, he's right, you know, when he talks about, you know, he is the son of immigrants, he knows why people want to come to the United Kingdom, but, you know, coming to this country has responsibilities, you know, contributing to it and being part of the country. It's not fair on other people if we don't control this issue. So, look, the bill's coming forward to the House of Commons next week, and it will be debated by colleagues, and I hope people can get behind it, because the other thing is there is nothing else available. There's, you know, nobody from Labour has got any ideas on this. There's a vacuum of ideas on how we're going to deal with what is a very changing, very modern, contemporary issue of all these people coming into the country illegally. So I think it deserves a fair hearing. Yes, it's new. Yes, it goes into new areas, but I think that's what we have to do with a new challenge. And I look forward to hearing the debate next week.
One thing that struck me listening to the Prime Minister today, who made this emergency press conference, of course, following the resignation of the Immigration Minister yesterday, there's open division in the Conservative Party over this issue. And one thing Rishi Sunak promised to do when he became Prime Minister was unite the party and end the division and the chaos of the Liz Truss government and Boris Johnson's government. That he has signally failed to do.
Well, I don't agree with that, because this is clearly an issue of debate in the Conservative Party, and nobody's running away from that at all. Obviously, the Immigration Minister resigned yesterday because, you know, he wanted to go further. He wanted to withdraw from European human rights law completely. And
he thinks he hasn't got a chance of getting through?
I'm sorry?
He thinks he hasn't got a chance of
succeeding?
That's fine,
and that's up to him. But the Prime Minister's dealing with lots of other narratives in this space as well, like Rwanda, who say, actually, if you leave that, this policy is going to fail. and there's no point even starting down this road. So it's all a balance. We all want more things in politics, and I've found that myself when I've been campaigning for veterans and veterans who've been prosecuted in Northern Ireland and things like that. I've always wanted more, but the art of it, actually, is being able to come together to unite around what is deliverable in the world as it is, not as we would want it to be, but as it is, and actually delivering something for hard-working, ordinary men and women up and down this country who see the unfairness of illegal migration. Anneliese.
But, Johnny, you haven't delivered. I mean, the question that was asked was whether this might cost... whether it would cost the Conservatives the election. Well, it's already cost taxpayers £140 million, this scheme. We've had more visits to Rwanda by Conservative Home Secretaries over the last 18 months than we've had asylum seekers go to be protest there. In fact, nobody's been sent there. And we've had 3 laws. This is now the 3rd law coming from the Conservatives that's been a gimmick that has not actually had proper workable proposals in it. With the first law, they had to rescind a bunch of that because it wasn't workable. The second law wasn't even implemented because it was discovered that it would make the situation worse. Now, with this 3rd law, as Johnny just said, even the immigration minister who was meant to be putting it through the House of Commons is disavowing it. We need a proper plan on this. We need to have a proper cross-border police unit working on those criminal gangs. They are exploiting people appallingly. Labour would be instead using that money for that kind of cross-border work. We'd be investing in caseworkers as well. You know, Johnny, even if this gets off the ground, right, you would be talking about probably very small numbers of people compared to what this government has created, which is a large number of people now in hotel accommodation, 10,000 more since the Prime Minister said he was going to end that hotel accommodation. Now, the way you deal with that is by actually processing people. So Labour would be hiring caseworkers so that we could process those people, so we could get a grip on this and have returns agreements, because the amount of returns have gone down by 70% under the Conservatives. Immigration is important for our country, and because it's important, we need to have a system that actually works, that's fair. And I'm afraid this kind of gimmickry, frankly, is not fair. It's not fair for anyone. We need to have a system that will actually work.
All right, let's get around some of these hands that are up. The man at the back, yes.
I'd like to ask the Conservative member of the Cabinet, rather than blame these poor people that are coming over, being exploited and threaten them with deportation to what's been ruled as an unsafe country, why wouldn't we rather open up more legal, safe routes and options for these people to flee persecution or any troubles they're going through, to come to a safe country like the United Kingdom? We should welcome these people.
Do you want to answer that quickly, Johnny?
Yeah. I'm more than happy to answer that question, because actually, if we look at the area I'm working on in Afghanistan, I've actually been up to Garrett's Hay today, where we are receiving people into this country from war-torn countries. We've resettled 25,000 people from Afghanistan now, and people are working incredibly hard every day to show the compassion that we need in this country towards these people. That is not the same as open borders. And yes, there is a public consultation going on now as to what those safe and legal routes should be. But this is an entirely separate issue. And when the Albanians were doing this, you know, nearly 80% of them were men. And when it comes to returns, you know, there is a return agreement with Albania, and most of those have gone back. No, let me finish, because I let you finish, right? And most of them have now gone back. Returns have gone down, have gone up to Albania, sorry. And you've seen in other, you say it's not working, right, but in other countries, we've seen a massive increase in this over the summer, in Italy and places like that, up to 80%. In this country, small boats have gone down 30%. Is it everything? No. Is it everything we wanted? No. But it's a start. And the things we're doing are beginning to work. It's a very difficult problem. And the solutions that are proposed by Anneliese, you know, we're doing them already. The cross-border force, the tackling these gangs, it's happening. So I'm afraid it's just pie in the sky. And if it crashes with reality, it's just going to get worse and worse.
Woman in the glasses.
Previously, you mentioned British values.
Yeah.
How do you think that the Rwanda scheme complies with the tolerance that Britain is supposed to stand for?
Yeah, absolutely.
Johnny, I tell you what, I'm going to come back to you. I'll make a note of this, because otherwise I won't bring other people in the panel. Yes, the man there with the glasses and the green sweater in the middle there. Yeah.
Illegal migration makes up 5% of total migration to the country. I think Rwanda is just used as a distraction from your failures.
OK. So, Peter, the question is, will the Rwanda bill cost the Conservatives the next general election?
Well, no, because they've already lost it. That's not an issue. Anneliese goes on about it being stunts and gimmicks. In 18 months or so time, we'll be able to see what sort of stunts and gimmicks Keir Starmer government will be using in the same way to try and not solve the same problem. And the same will be true of legal immigration, which is an immense problem in this country because both the major political parties support very large amounts of legal immigration, but they're not prepared to confess this to their voters. And so they engage in stunts and gimmicks to try to pretend otherwise. That's the fundamental problem, that we have governments which don't, of both parties, which actually favour immigration but don't want to admit this to people who actually dislike it and with whom it's unpopular. And this is not going to be very easily solved. I would say, because it's vitally important to bear it in mind in case we do any of these stupid things again, that it has been mad, jingoistic, utopian interventions in foreign countries, particularly the Iraq War, the Syria War and the Libyan War, in which this country has intervened in all three cases, have created a gigantic migration crisis throughout Europe, have opened the eyes of millions of people to the fact that it's much easier to get into Europe and indeed across the Channel than they thought it was. How we put that back, I don't know. But what I would say is the next time a government comes to you and says, look, let's go and have a war somewhere, ask them whether they know what they're doing and ask them whether they've worked out what the consequences were, because this is a direct consequence of those wars. And the more we behave like this, the more it will happen. We've started something we don't know how to cope with. But you really also have to find somebody in this country who's prepared to come up with a responsible plan for reducing legal immigration. And for that, we need to change our society. Why is it that we cannot, in this country, apparently train or recruit so many of the people we need to do the most basic jobs? Why is it that our education system is so useless that we have to bring in people from abroad who've been trained at great expense, often in much poorer countries than ours, to do the jobs we won't do? We really do need to look at this, at our education system, at the way we've sidelined the family, at the way in which we've completely revolutionised our society, which has created this demand for legal immigration. And when we do that, we might get somewhere, not before.
Because we're talking about illegal migration.
Well, we're talking about both, because the...
Well, no, the question is about the Rwanda bill, so we're not talking about both, but I hear what you have to say.
Quite rightly raised the...
OK, but sticking with Tilly's question, because it deserves an answer, George, and I should just say before you start speaking, you have valiantly come in this evening, despite the fact you're battling a horrific cold and you're trying to keep your voice together, and we're very grateful. Will the Rwanda bill cost the Conservatives the next general election?
Look, of all the hills to die on, this has got to be the most ridiculous. I mean, it's just absurd. The whole point of the Rwanda policy is not to try to solve anything. It's to performatively beat up some of the most vulnerable and traumatised people on earth in order to distract attention from the government's own failures. And Johnny says, this is giving the working people of this country something. The only thing this is giving the working people of this country is to show them that somebody else is worse off than they are, because that somebody is being performatively beaten up by the government. That's the point of the policy. And we have this ridiculous new bill, which is the first one I've ever seen, which tries to legislate the nature of reality. It says, we will legislate that Rwanda is a safe country. Regardless of whether Rwanda is or is not a safe country, we will put it in the law that it is a safe country. You might as well have a bill which legislates that the moon is made of green cheese. We have reached the point now, after 13 years of these fiascos, of total absurdity. They're not even intending to put this into implementation. They don't intend to make this a viable policy. They're just desperately throwing up clouds of dust in order to distract from the absolute catastrophe that this government has become for the great majority of the people of this country. And that would be a point of mere amusement for comfortable people like ourselves sitting behind this table. But it has real consequences for real people. And among those people are people who have already suffered appalling things, unspeakable things, and just desperately want refuge, a safe haven. And what do they get instead? They get a government of sadists deliberately beating them up in order to show how tough they are.
You'll need to answer that, Johnny. I'm going to get a couple more interventions from the audience, then, of course, I'll come back to you. Yes, the woman there in the black top.
I just want to come back to what this gentleman has said. I think you've picked up on something that I really wanted to say, and that's the Conservative narrative, which seems to have played out over the past 10 years about working people and what's good for them, and the goodness of people not coming here to take jobs. And it seems to be playing one group against another. And I think people are now seeing through that. And if you want to win the next election, I think you're out of time anyway, but you needed to show far more compassion, because I think people's views have changed.
Let me just ask, because there are, just in the interest of balance, I know there are Conservative voters in the audience here, and the Prime Minister, and I presume you, Johnny, clearly think that this is something that will win votes. That's why they're pursuing it. Who here does support the Rwanda policy? You, sir, let's hear from you.
Well, the question is, there are about 500 million distressed and traumatised people in the world. So how many do we want to come to the UK, is the first point, which is a rather obvious point. The second point is that let's try everything, because short of taking really drastic action, what else can one do but try everything?
OK. Anyone else before I... Go on. Yes, you, sir, in the blue shirt?
I think Peter said it best when he said the election's already lost. When people like myself who have voted Conservative all our lives and have been a member of the Conservative Party, I tore up my membership card after Sunak was installed as leader. The last year has been an absolute shambles, and this Rwanda bill is frankly just the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Right, so Johnny, I was trying to see if there were Conservative supporters here who support Rwanda. I've had one voice. Are there any others, just out of interest? Yes, one more at the back.
Yeah, I think the thing with the Rwanda deal is that whilst in theory it's a great idea, or it's a good idea, the reality is that it's been, like a lot of things under this government, executed, very badly. And I think it's time that, they give up on it, because it's never going to get going. And frankly, we've wasted a lot of money already.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, Johnny, what can I say? I mean, I've asked if there are people who support the policy. I've managed to find one, sir, and you've made your point. The question originally was, will the Rwanda bill cost the Conservatives the next general election? I'm not trying to overstate the importance of all of you here, but it's not looking good.
Look, it's not being done to win votes. Obviously, that's a narrative that is spun. I'm not going to answer a lot of...
Well, you're not doing it to lose votes, Johnny, come on.
So, the idea we're all sadists. I was actually up at 5:30 this morning visiting all the homeless in London. I've been spending my day with Afghan refugees. You have no idea who I am. I have no idea who you are, but you spout this bile about the Conservative Party that just drives this narrative the whole time. There's nothing compassionate about kids drowning in the Channel. There's nothing compassionate about enabling these trafficking gangs and not doing anything at all to try and stop their business. There's nothing compassionate about letting people into this country, unfettered access into a country that needs to provide good quality public services for people who live here. So, look, I think that, the idea this is being done for votes is incorrect, and I'm actually in the government. It's not done for votes. It's done because it's a requirement, because we have too many people coming in. We've had the migration figures.
Yes, but come on, Johnny, come on.
Look,
clearly the government thinks it will win votes. They're not doing it thinking it's going to go down badly.
No, they obviously think because they're trying to solve the migration crisis.
Yes, but Rishi Sunak keeps saying this is what people want.
This is a narrative that's driven. No one sits there and thinks, what's the sort of policy that's really going to get us votes when it comes to immigration? Immigration is an incredibly complex issue that has transformed over the last few years with numbers of people coming over the Channel, that we have to have a new approach to trying novel things to try and do. And that is what the Prime Minister's trying to do. It's not about, this demonising of migrants is absolutely ridiculous. I've seen it with my own eyes today, what the British values are when it comes to migrants and to looking after people in this country.
Did you just say...
It's wonderful that it fits this narrative, but it is completely false. And we have to deal with the real world and what we're really seeing on a day-to-day basis.
Johnny, did you just say that nobody in the government sits down and wonders what is going to get them votes?
No.
I think you did.
You did just say that.
No, I said on this policy.
I think that may get into the Oxford Dictionary quotation.
On this policy, no one thinks what is the harshest policy that we can introduce that is just simply going to play to whichever wing of the party and bring us votes. It's about doing the right thing and solving a very, very difficult issue. I'm not saying that for all policy, Peter, but I'm saying that on this policy. And I've been in the Cabinet with these discussions, and that is not the intention of this policy.
But Johnny, you were talking about the overall levels of migration there, and I think a really important point was made earlier. Well, you talked generally about migration from what I heard. You talked about the figures that came out recently. That was about overall levels, and a really important point was made earlier. And there's a bit of commentary on this from Peter, but I don't think Peter was right about this. If we look at what has happened overall to work visas in our country, we see that, by the latest figures, over 50% increase in work visas, over 150% increase in health and social care visas. And actually, contrary to what Peter said, there is a party that recognises we've got to do something about this, that recognises we've got to have a workforce strategy for our country, that we need to have a proper training and skills system for our country, that we shouldn't have a discount at the moment through the shortage occupations scheme, which is not fair on anyone, and that we need to have a fair pay agreement in social care. So there is a different approach.
The subject we're talking about tonight, or right now anyway, is illegal migration, which obviously is a completely separate matter. These are people who are not invited here, as they are obviously for legal migration. George, a final word for you, which I know you're trying to come in, and then I want to move on.
Thanks, Fiona. Well, look, it's a very simple matter, which the likes of Johnny have tried to make as complicated as possible. There are about 20,000 people coming over in small boats every year to the UK. UK is one of the richest nations on earth. If one of the richest nations on earth can't cope with 20,000 people in small boats every year, we don't have a migration crisis.
It's near 40,000.
Is it now? Well,
mid-30s.
Well, we don't have a migration crisis.
The facts don't matter.
We have a crisis of governance.
Where are they coming from? George, where are they coming from?
You are misleading people.
Which country? No, I want George to answer this.
You know you're misleading.
What are you talking about?
George Monbiot, where are they coming from, these people in the boats?
People have been fleeing countries.
No, but where are they coming from? Where do they get into the boats?
Well, they got onto the boats in France.
In France?
Well, no.
Is France
but the point is
France a country?
Hang on. If you both talk at the same... Wait a minute. You both talk at the same time. Wait. Hang on, Peter, please. If you both talk at the same time, nobody can hear.
No, I asked him a factual question, and he's answered it. They come from France. France is not a country in which they suffer persecution or have any reason to fear persecution. Once they've reached France, they're not refugees. And it really is time that you stop over-emotionalising this and making out that it's some sort of act of cruelty for one highly civilized country to refuse to take people who wish to enter from another highly civilized country illegally. If they want to come to this country, they should come legally. They are already in a safe country. And it doesn't need anybody, it doesn't even need Rishi Sunak to pass a bill saying that France is a safe country, because France is a safe country, as we both agree. So I'm afraid you're just laying it on a bit thick. And I'm sorry, I know you've got a bad throat, but I just do think you should be more careful in your language about it.
You just don't understand international law. International refugee law makes it abundantly clear that refugees have the right to choose where they seek asylum.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
OK, Peter, we heard your point. Thank you. I am going to move on.
There was no reason for them to come here as refugees. They are not refugees from France. And France would be very insulted if you said that they were.
You made your point, Peter. Thank you. I am going to move on and take another question, because a lot of you asked about this next topic, so I'm going to move on to it. Before I do, I just want to say that our last question time of the year is in the Scottish border towns of Kelso next week. So if you live in Kelso or thereabouts, you'd like to come and be part of the audience, go to the Question Time website. You can follow the instructions there. And then our first Question Time after Christmas is in Oxford on January the 11th. So if you'd like to be part of that programme, the details are also on the website. Do apply. We'd love to see you in the audience. And you will get a word in edgeways, I promise you. Right, next question from Gerald. Gerald Sommeriva.
Yeah. Given Sir Keir Starmer has acknowledged that Margaret Thatcher was transformative, will he really be transformative, or just another lightweight Tony Blair?
Very interesting sound from the audience there. Anneliese.
Yes, I mean, Keir did recognise that Margaret Thatcher was transformative. I don't think anybody really could disagree with that. She came in to office with a really clear plan about what she wanted to do with our country. Now, obviously, Labour believes that a lot of the outcomes from that plan did not serve our country well. But there's no question that she had a plan. I think there's a big contrast there, both with many Labour governments, you know, those reforming Labour governments when they had a clear plan, but then I would say also, ultimately, with the situation we've had over the last few years. We've had...
Yeah, but hang on, Anneliese. The question is about Keir Starmer, so let's stick with Keir Starmer. Will he be transformative or just a lightweight version of Tony Blair?
It will be transformative because we're really clear that we need to have a long-term approach, that we need to ensure we have that decade of national renewal. We've set out those 5 missions to transform our country, done that very early, not at the last minute in election campaign. We've done it very, very early so that we can set all of that really clear right now. We know it's not going to be possible to change our country overnight, but we've changed our party and we're determined to make sure we can change our country. And it's that point about being ambitious for change, not letting things drift like we've seen, actually being ambitious and seeing that we can match the ambitions of the British people. That's what Labour wants to do.
And where are you going to get the money to do that? Because looking at the state of the public finances such as we know them and the squeeze on public sector spending, for example, looking at a possible £21 billion deficit by 2027, and looking at your 5 pledges, get Britain building again, get the NHS back on its feet, take back our streets, how are you going to afford to do half of that?
Well, by taking very different choices, very different choices. So first on taxation, for example, we think that if you live in our country, you should pay tax in our country, so we would cancel the non-dom tax exemption and we would use that money to be paying for extra appointments in our NHS and to be paying for example, free breakfast clubs for our children in primary schools. We think that's the right choice to make. There are other different choices that we would take on taxation like that. But we'd also make different choices when it comes to the size of the pie in the first place, because that has been one of the big differences that we've had under recent Conservative governments compared to under Labour governments, particularly the last one. We had far higher levels of growth on average under Labour governments than what we've seen recently. We've not seen that increase in living standards over recent years that we saw under Labour governments. And when you have a bigger pie in the first place, then you're able ultimately to be paying for those public services far better. So we wouldn't be in this position that the Conservatives have left us in, low growth and the highest levels of taxation since the war.
Peter.
I would just like to challenge what the questioner said about Sir Anthony Blair being a lightweight. Now, personally...
No, he didn't. He said... He didn't say Tony Blair was a lightweight. He said, will Keir Starmer be a lightweight version of Tony Blair?
Well, no, he said, as was Tony Blair. I mean,
I don't think you did, Gerald, did you?
No, basic point is, I don't think we know what Secure stands for.
Well, that's what people thought. That's what people thought about Sir Anthony Blair. When he came to office, if not to power, he had people with him who did the power, he did the office. But the point about Blair was that he pretended to be a person of no consequence. It was all education, education, tough on the causes of crime. In fact, he was the most radical leader this country has had since Oliver Cromwell. Vast constitutional change, the breakup of the United Kingdom, launching huge foreign wars of choice.
What about Keir Starmer?
Immense changes in power. Well, what I'm saying is you should be aware of these people. They are, in fact, far, far more radical than they appear to be, or they wish to appear to be seen. Keir Starmer is constantly described as a moderate. I can, in fact, reveal to you tonight the fascinating fact that he is a Pabloite. An extremely exotic type of revolutionary. You haven't even heard of this, you see.
OK, hang on a second. Is it just me? How many of you have heard of a Pabloite?
Nobody has, but I have, because I know...
Well, do you want to tell us what it is, then, Peter?
It is a particular brand of revolutionary politics. That's what he spent his time doing right up until his middle 20s. He said in an interview in The New Statesman, when asked if he'd given up the radical ideas of his youth, oh, no. I still very much support them. It's fundamentally what is called a red-green combination of almost fanatical concentration on green policies such as net zero, combined with cultural revolution such as the sexual revolution, which New Labour put such a wind behind and is continuing, but all the changes in schools and everything else to make them more left-wing and more propagandist than they were. All these things which Labour did in its 1997 10-year government will be intensified. And if you imagine that by voting for Keir Starmer you're going to get a quiet life, you're very much mistaken. And look up Pablo in Wikipedia. For once, it's reasonably accurate, and you can find out exactly what it means. It's fascinating. And also look up Keir Starmer's political background when he was a young and ambitious lawyer, and what he joined and what he didn't join. Okay. And you'll see a very, very left-wing person who remains that. And if he becomes Prime Minister, you'll get a very left-wing government. I'm telling you this now because in 5 years' time, everybody will agree with it. Now, as with everything I say, everybody thinks it's crazy, but it's true, and you'll find out it's true.
So, don't all rush to Wikipedia at once. Yes, the woman here in the front.
This question is directed at Anneliese.
Oh, you've written it down, right?
Yes,
okay.
I have.
Is it relevant to the subject that we're discussing?
Yes, it is.
Excellent.
It is. Yeah. Could you tell us if this transformative plans that Keir Starmer or Labour has in mind, does it include reforming carers allowance? Because I am a former illegal migration processing officer, one of those caseworkers you were talking about, that's just had to give up her job, no choice, to look after someone that desperately needs care. So I'm a carer. And essentially, we all know that, you know, this current government's policy about carers allowance is, there, you've done a good job, now go away, that's your pocket money. Can we review and reform this carers allowance because it's not helping anyone? £1.07 an hour.
Quickly.
And obviously, what you do is incredibly important. In fact, it saves the state a huge amount of money because.
So will you give her more money? That's what you're basically asking.
I cannot, and Labour will not just say off pat to different kind of specific requests. Yes, we will open up the purse because I think we all know the dire straits our country's in financially. Okay. Are we going to try and make sure we've got a far better system around care? Absolutely,
okay, but
and that applies to the workforce as well.
Will you get more money?
As I said, I'm not going to promise that for an individual request. I'm sorry, I don't think that's financially sensible. Yeah.
Man here in the front.
You seem to be saying that steering towards left-wing more is a bad thing. I honestly would start to see, and enjoy to start to see, a government steer more towards the left than towards the right wing, which is where we seem to be heading.
OK. The woman behind you with the red scarf. So the question is, will Keir Starmer just be a lightweight version of Tony Blair?
Well, who do we vote for if we want austerity measures to end? Given it's been 13 years and we're still skint. People aren't...
All right. George, will Keir Starmer be a lightweight version of Tony Blair?
So these sympathetic things that Keir Starmer said about Margaret Thatcher were not an attempt to appeal to the electorate. They were an attempt to appeal to Rupert Murdoch and Lord Rothermere and the other owners of the billionaire press. And these, unfortunately, are the real powers in this country. And it's a profoundly undemocratic situation. And in order for a Labour Party leader to get a licence to govern, they have to grovel to those offshore billionaires. And this explains and accounts for so much of what's going wrong in this country. And this is a really bad sign. If he's already grovelling, even though he's in such a powerful position now, he could sweep the Tories off the board, he could get a massive majority, he could introduce genuine transformative change. But the moment you flinch is the moment they've got you. And then everything you do from that moment onwards is going to be with one eye glancing over your shoulder at what the likes of Murdoch and Rothermere and the other owners of the billionaire media want you to do.
So will he get your vote, Keir Starmer?
Look, I desperately want to get the Tories out. And so I will vote in my constituency for whoever is most likely to do that, who's anywhere to the left of the Tories. We've had a catastrophic 13 years. But Starmer has a tremendous opportunity, and I fear he's just not going to take it.
OK. The man in the, is it a grey top, zip top with a white T-shirt there? Yeah, no, I'll come to you in a minute, sir. Yes, the man there.
Yeah, I'd just like to support the opportunity to bring in genuine political reform. We've had the expenses scandal, people are still able to lobby politicians of any party. So if Labour do get in, I would strongly encourage them to use that opportunity to deliver something long-term that reforms the political system that makes it better for everybody.
OK. The man in the suit here.
Well, I don't know so much about him being a lightweight Tony Blair, but in terms of reforming, it seems Labour's solutions, well, let's throw more money at things. Well, what about actually reforming things like social care? Stop the privatisation of it, for example. Stop the low-wage economy around social care. And perhaps also try to organise things a bit more rationally, having the NHS in charge of people's care, rather the system at the moment, especially with social care, councils subcontract to private companies. They can make money off, you know, the public purse, essentially, by paying their workforce minimum wage and crimming off the profits from themselves. So will this stop? Will we see real reform from Sir Keir Starmer, or won't we?
OK. Alice, I'll come back to you in a minute. Let me bring Johnny, if you haven't spoken yet. Will Keir Starmer be transformative or a lightweight
Look,
version
I'm not.
of Tony Blair?
Obviously, you know, George thinks I'm a sadist and in the Conservative Party, all those things. You know, I'm not going to demonise.
You can fess up now if that's what you really...
Sorry?
You can always fess up now if you want to agree to that.
No, I mean, you know, it fits the character. But,
not.
you know, Keir Starmer's not a bad guy, right? And I'm not going to sit here and demonise him. But what I would say is that it is almost impossible to know what he believes in. And with someone like that, you get to a place where they will almost say and do anything simply to get elected, and that's incredibly dangerous. So I know you're a huge fan of Jeremy Corbyn, but at least he believed in something, right? With this, I mean, you know, I'm obviously the Veterans Minister going to Remembrance. You know, Keir on speaking to one group of people as his poppy on, takes it off to speak to another group of people. And it's kind of like, make your mind up. What are you? Who are you standing for? And when it comes to, you know, spending money, I mean, the Labour Party have already committed to this £28 billion worth of extra spending, which will drive up inflation, which is the #1 thing that is hitting the pockets of people in Plymouth. The policies that have been U-turned on are just ridiculous. It's like a joke in this country that Labour have a policy and they go back on it once they've spoken to someone about it. So, look, I'm not going to sit here and say Keir Starmer's a dreadful man, because he's not, and he wants to try his best. The truth is, he believes in absolutely nothing at all, provided you vote for him. And if that's the sort of lead you want, fine, but that's not what the nation is about, and that's not what leadership is about.
OK, briefly, I know you want to come back in.
Yeah, I mean, where do I start, quite frankly, in relation to that? My goodness, when you target rich environment, I'm sorry, Johnny, that was just absolute nonsense. I think it's really clear what Keir believes in, and that's rooted in who he is himself. You know, he's got a working-class background, he's fed up with our country not working for working people anymore, and so is the rest of the Labour Party, and that's what we're going to change. And to come back to the question originally, you know, will Labour just throw money at this? Well, the Conservatives are leaving our country in an appalling state financially, so we know that's not going to be possible. And that's why we will reform. It's why we'll have an independent ethics commission in Parliament, for example. It's why we'll stop water bosses at the moment getting massive bonuses when they're pumping sewage into our rivers. It's why we'll have technology in our NHS to support people, rather than some hospitals still working with fax machines. We will reform and we will change our country, and we will make sure when it comes to social care, as I said before, that we have fair pay agreements, because we're not going to let these issues drift anymore like they have over the 13 years. We're going to make sure we get a grip on them. That's the difference.
Lisa Walker, let's hear from you. Let's have our next question.
What one single outcome would the panel like to see from the COP28 annual climate conference?
Which, of course, is taking place now in Dubai. George, single outcome? Can you pick one?
Leave fossil fuels in the ground. It's so simple. So I thank you for the question. There's now been 27 of these meetings. 25 of them have been total failures. 2 of them have been partial successes, 1997 and 2015. Not a single final agreement from any of those meetings has said what needs to be done, which is to leave fossil fuels in the ground. And unless we leave fossil fuels in the ground, we have absolutely no hope of preventing climate breakdown. Because it's a bit like going on a diet and saying, OK, yes, I did eat a gigantic tub of ice cream and an enormous cake, but I also ate a salad, so why aren't I losing weight? Doesn't matter how many wind turbines you put up. Doesn't matter how many solar panels you put up. Unless you're retiring fossil fuel infrastructure, unless you are legislating to leave coal, oil and gas where it belongs, which is in geological strata, you are going to cook the planet. It is as simple as that. And as a result of the highly effective and lethal fossil fuel lobbying, which has been a bugbear of these conferences from the very beginning, from 1992, and has now got to such a ridiculous point that the president of COP28 is in his day job the chief executive of the UAE oil and gas company ADNOC, which is currently expanding its oil production. That is what has thwarted the simple things that need to be done. And while we wait and wait, the years tick by, and we've got so few years left now. We're going to have to take drastic action if we're going to avoid what could well be Earth systems collapse. I mean, this is the most important predicament humanity has ever faced. And by design, as a result of the enormous oppressive power of the fossil fuel industry, we're flunking it.
So, Johnny. George says leave fossil fuels in the ground. The government is issuing new oil licences and wants to continue doing that every year.
Yeah, look, nobody disagrees with that direction of travel and no one disagrees with that destination. The question is all about how we get there and how we bring people with us and how we make sure that we actually make this transition meaningful. So that we take the actions that we have. Now, you know, the idea that you would never use fossil fuels again would not be something anybody would argue against. The question is, the impact of that is extraordinary in this country on people's livelihoods, on people's jobs. And the issue is around doing that in a balanced way, as you've seen, for example, with this, with the net zero target and so on that this Prime Minister's raised at party conference, is about bringing people with us. We all agree on the destination. We all agree on that. The trouble is, you're a very emotional speaker, and you know the world's going to all end tomorrow. The trouble is, we have to do this in a way when you're kind of dealing with this in the reality of it. You can't just turn the system off, right? Put people out of their jobs, have people living in poverty, and just throw up a load of wind turbines and think it's going to be okay. The other issue is around energy security. And we've seen that this year with what's going on in Ukraine and with Putin. And we can't end up in that situation again where we are so reliant on him. So I accept you have a different view, but I think it's incredibly emotional and misleading. We all agree with that destination, and no one disagrees with that destination. It's about how we get there, and actually extraordinary progress has been made under this government.
No, extraordinary progress has not been made under this government. It has deliberately trashed some of the progress even that was made under Boris Johnson's government. There are such simple things we could do. For example, the government is currently spending £78 billion across 2 years in subsidising people's energy bills. But for £8 billion, it could insulate the 3 million homes most in need, greatly cutting people's bills and greatly cutting our emissions. We now have a situation where renewables are much cheaper than fossil fuels. But the government is deliberately trying to lock us into fossil fuels, not for the sake of the people of this country, not to cut our bills. It does exactly the opposite. For the sake of the oil and gas industry, the government, the Tory party rather, has taken £3.5 million in donations from polluting industries. This is the quid pro quo.
I'd just like to ask you a question, George. Do you honestly sit there and think that in number 10 every day, the Prime Minister and the government wake up and they think, we're just going to torch the world?
Yes, roughly.
OK, that answers your question then, Johnny. Johnny, that answers your question. Come on.
Right? That plays into your narrative, right? But it's not reality.
They just don't care.
You're misleading people.
The fact is they don't care.
You're deliberately misleading.
Sunak himself, he flew to COP28 in a 200-seater jet. But he was the only minister who flew in that jet. Other ministers flew in separate private jets. He doesn't care. He treats this whole country like a flyover state, blatting backwards and forwards in his helicopters and private jets.
George, let me bring other people in. The woman there in the shirt, yes, you.
The Conservative narrative around extracting new oil from UK waters is that it will provide us energy security. That's all you ever say. Please explain how that will give us more energy security than a community-owned renewable energy system.
Sure. So the issue around energy security, clearly we have imported cheap oil and gas from Russia and other places for a long time now, and we don't have control over that, as we've seen with this conflict now. Now, if you could suddenly make a transition straight to green energy, why would you not do it? The trouble is, with all
but
these
how will
things,
you
it's
have
not black
control?
and white, and you can't just pull that lever and make it happen.
How
so
will you
it's a
have
transition
control over it?
towards net zero, and this is part of that.
But the question is, how does it, by issuing these new oil licences, how does it make our energy supply more secure, given that it will be produced by a private company that can sell it to the highest bidder, and we will not have first dibs on that? So how does it make it more secure?
Because we will be able to control that production.
No, we won't.
No.
So
it'll be down to private companies.
No, but we will be able to control what is going on in that space in order to make sure that energy goes through to the United Kingdom in times like this when Putin turns off the gas and we don't have
sell it to us
anything.
any cheaper than they'll sell it to everybody
Okay,
else
but
in the
that's
world.
not what
It's
the
a
license-
lie.
Hang on, George. This was making perfectly. Let's let her make the point. No, just repeat what you said, because we couldn't
It's
hear.
a lie. It's a
Well, it hasn't
complete
happened,
and
so it can't be a
outright
lie.
lie. While my children are growing up in an awful biodiversity, nature-depleted country, which... I can't.
Well, the point you're making is that if it's a private company selling the oil, how will it make us more secure? Because we will be no more likely to get hold of it than anyone else. And that you've not been able to answer.
No, I disagree, because of the controls that we'll put in place that make sure that when we have a better balance, i.e. we're not taking all this oil
So
and
we'll
gas,
requisition it.
we're going to have that.
OK, George, I'm going to bring
this
other
is
people
all
in.
in the theoretical anyway, isn't it?
Well, you made the claim about security, so you were just being asked to justify it.
Yeah.
Peter.
So much moralising, so much posturing. What do people actually think they're achieving? Anybody can look at it's called the energy dashboard. You can get it up on your computer anytime and see on a normal day in this country where the power which is lighting your home and your place of work and everything else you see, where it's coming from. And on a day when the wind isn't blowing, it's largely coming from gas. Or it's coming from imported power, which quite often comes from the Netherlands, where they still burn coal. We don't burn coal anymore because we didn't just close down our coal-fired power stations, we blew them up. We were so certain we were right to do so. At the same time, China is, even as we speak, building the equivalent of two new coal-fired power stations a week. India has a vast expansion program of coal-fired power stations, even if George is right about his tremendous predictions of apocalypse. And I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm in no position to say he's wrong. Even if he's right, the contribution which this country is making by what it's doing to these outcomes is not merely minimal, it's non-existent. Everything that we do is completely blotted out by what much larger countries are doing to maintain their own power. Now, if you want to live in a country with net zero, if you want to live in a country where nobody can afford to heat their house, where people have incredibly expensive and largely non-functioning heat pumps inflicted on them, if you want that kind of thing to happen to you, if you want lots of people to lose their jobs because there's no energy, if you want to be cold all the time, if you want the computers which make life possible in practically every form of life to shut down every so often, then carry on believing that the demand to go for net zero, to keep it in the ground, is intelligent and thoughtful. Even if George is right, this is not an intelligent response to it.
OK, but Peter, in terms of the question, what single outcome would the panel like to see? What single outcome would you like to see from COP?
Well, I'd love to hear someone at one of these conferences say, do you know what, perhaps we might be wrong.
OK,
that would be the best outcome for all of us. Just somebody to say, just for once, and the BBC might do the same thing as well, I imagine.
What single outcome?
Well, I think the biggest outcome has got to be a recognition that unless we do more on this, we're not going to be delivering energy security.
Well, they're all going to say
bills.
we should do more, but it's more specifically, what single outcome would you like to see from COP28?
And I think there's been, to be honest, within this conversation, if I may, a huge amount of confusion. The UK does not import huge amounts of Russian gas.
It did.
OK. The reason why that's been an issue for us in this country is because the domestic and more local gas that we import, the price of that is set internationally. So when that rises, we're buffeted by it as well. So actually, opening up new licences, as the government say that they want to do, that's not going to be getting costs down because they're pegged internationally. So it's completely irrelevant. All that's done in terms of that government policy, just like with the change on electric cars, is it's made international investors confused about where our country's going. Are we serious about having those new jobs of the future, winning that race for those new technologies, or are we going to chop and change all of the time? Because renewable energy in our country is up to 9 times cheaper than gas. Why aren't we seizing that opportunity? And by the way, I come from an oil and gas producing community, OK? You probably can't hear it very much now, but I come from Aberdeenshire originally. A lot of my friends work in the oil and gas industry. They believe that change is coming. They know change is coming. They want to be part of that change. We can't afford for them not to be, because they're the ones who've got amazing engineering skills. They've worked in a safety-critical industry for years. It has been dangerous and difficult for them, but now they want to be part of that change. And I think setting our face against that race so that our country doesn't have any hope of winning it, and so that investment will be pulled out, is really bad for all of us, as well as terrible for our energy security and making our bills higher as well.
Yeah, but how you
all right. Peter, I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in, if I may. I just want to try and squeeze this last question in. It got a lot of questions came in about this. Anne Hazelgrove, where? Anne, here we go.
Will the COVID inquiry result in any changes, or will it sit on a shelf gathering dust?
And of course, we heard the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson at the COVID inquiry today and yesterday. Will it result in any changes, Peter?
No, it's not designed to result in any changes. It's designed to confirm the whole terrible mistake which was made by the government in closing down the country, wrecking the economy, destroying the lives of many formerly healthy old people, wrecking the schools and the universities and mangling the education of hundreds of thousands of children and students, again, irrevocably.
And when you say it's not designed to do
the inquiry is entirely devoted to the belief that we did not lock down, that horrible phrase, which should remain in American prisons where it comes from. We did not lock down soon enough or hard enough. That is what I promise you, that's what the inquiry will report. It has quite rightly given space to bereaved people who are there and who are witnesses to the inquiry. And so it should, because people should be aware that people were bereaved. But it hasn't given space, as far as I know, to people who've been bereaved by the consequences of our government's wild overreaction to COVID. I think that I said this at the time, this is not hindsight. I said that it would lead to economic disaster. I said that it would punish and harm old people. I said that it would damage the health service. And I was absolutely right. I actually also predicted the inflation we're all now going through. These things were all the consequences of it, and they have had disastrous effects on the physical lives, the physical health and the mental health of huge numbers of people, and those who have been bereaved by that should be represented there as well. But they're not, because the inquiry doesn't see that. It's all about process. It's all about process and swear words and what minister said this to what minister and what Dominic Cummings swore to somebody else. It's not about whether we were right to do this. Okay. Were we right? There is actually, as far as I know, and maybe there's somebody here, Stephen, who can tell me where the research is, that any research which says that lockdowns saved any lives.
Woman here.
Yeah, picking up on actually some of the points made, why is so much effort and money being ploughed into this inquiry when really looking at it from a public's perspective, it's a blame game. They're all just sitting there pointing the finger at each other, going, well, he said that, she said that, and no one's actually taking responsibility for their part in it, and it seems like no policy change is ever going to come from this.
George?
I sincerely hope that there are some policy changes coming out of this, because what we witness again, what we're being reminded of now, is the absolute fiasco of the government's handling of the pandemic. Now, we could argue about whether lockdowns were the right way to do it or whether something else was the right way to do it. But what we know is that every single thing they did was wrong. If you're going to lock down, you have to lock down early. They failed to do that. If you're not going to lock down, you need, like in South Korea and Taiwan, a really, really good test and trace system, which meant that they didn't have to lock down and they lost hardly anyone in the first year of the pandemic. 7 people in Taiwan died of COVID without any lockdowns because they had a highly effective government which wanted to save lives. We had a government with a Prime Minister talking about letting the bodies pile high, talking about elderly people having had a good innings, so they should just shuffle off this mortal coil and not bother us anymore. Whichever way you look at it, this was a government of fecklessness which was just off the scale. A shocking, shocking catalogue of failure by people who should never have been in those positions in the first place. They were the worst possible people at the worst possible time.
We've got about 3 minutes left. I have to be reasonably brief, I'm afraid, Anneliese. Will it result in any changes or just gather dust?
Well, it really needs to result in change.
But do you think it will? That's the question. Not should it, but will it?
What I'm concerned about is for it to result in change, there's got to be full transparency about what actually happened. We've still got a situation, unfortunately, where there hasn't been full transparency. I agree with what was said about,
in what way?
Unfortunately, government figures seeming to focus on that blame game rather than being open about what took place. But why have we got to have that transparency? Because we've got to be better prepared.
So where do you think the transparency is lacking, just to be clear?
So the government have not released all of the texts and WhatsApps and everything else. We've had the same from the SNP. Welsh Labour government has been different. They have been upfront about all of that. And this should be used genuinely in good faith as a way of us assessing, right, were we ready? If we weren't, what are we going to do about
Anneliese,
this?
we had
Peter, I've got to bring John. We won't get a chance to answer the question.
And you said we had a plan.
Any time
there
left.
was a plan to deal with this, and it was laid to one side so we could copy the People's Republic of China in their wild dictatorial methods, which is a complete mistake.
Peter, I'm sorry, we've got a minute and a half left. So in fairness, I have to let Johnny.
It was absolutely right, and everything the government did was wrong. People aren't stupid enough to believe that, right? Government is incredibly hard, it's messy, it's difficult. Were mistakes made? Of course they were, and I sincerely hope it does bring about change.
Do you think it will? That's the question.
Yes, I do think it will bring about change. Because, you know, you've seen the honesty that's going on in that space now. And I think lots of people in that inquiry have admitted they would have done different things at different times because it was an unprecedented challenge. And we can't be naive to that and just pretend that we would have done everything differently and everything would have been all right. That is not realistic politics.
Woman here.
I think very definitely we're looking at it with hindsight.
Yeah.
At the time, it was an unprecedented position. And you know, nobody had experienced anything like that in their lives before. So I think it's very difficult to see exactly what was happening at the time.
Absolutely.
OK, I've got about 30 seconds left. Yes, the man there in the... You've got a black top on, I think. Yes.
You know, it's quite simple. Everyone's talking about a blame game, and there's only one group of people to blame in all of this, and that is the Conservatives. The complete incompetence during COVID. It's all saying, oh, hindsight, you know, but, you know, what we've heard from this COVID inquiry and the one before is that the government at a time where they should have been protecting us were completely incompetent, and they were completely the wrong people doing the wrong people in power, and had zero clue what they were on about, and that is why so many people died in this country, because we had complete incompetence.
OK, you've made your point. Johnny, I'm sure you'd like to come back. I'm afraid I'm out of time, so forgive me. Our hour is up. Thank you for all your contributions. I just want to say before we go, Benjamin Zephaniah, as you will have seen, the writer and poet, his death has been announced today, and he was a regular panellist on Question Time, and a man I certainly had huge affection and respect for. He was an all-round, just tremendous bloke. And so I just want to say condolences to his family and all of us on Question Time. Don't forget, that's the end of our programme, but if you can't stay up late, we are always on iPlayer from 8 o'clock, so you can watch us then, always, of course, after the 10 o'clock news as well. We are in Kelso next week from Question Time, this week in Petersfield. Bye-bye.